At 23, I did something that shocked almost everyone who knew me. I married the man I loved without my parents' consent. For years, I told myself that was the moment I finally became brave. The moment I stood up for myself. The moment I chose my life. But nearly 40 years later, I discovered something that completely changed the way I understood my story. That decision was not entirely courage. Part of it was trauma. I had not suddenly found my voice. I had simply moved from one survival response to another. And when I finally understood that, I began to see how the frightened child I thought I had left behind had followed me into my marriage, my parenting, and almost every important relationship in my life. Stay with me, because you may discover some of the choices you had called strength, independence, submission, patience, or even love are actually childhood survival patterns still controlling your adult life. Welcome to Trauma Redeemed Mentorship channel. This is where we talk honestly about the childhood experiences that continue to shape how we live, love, parent, respond to conflict, and relationship with our God. My name is Christine Baida-Wachuku, and today I want to share part of my own story. Not because your story will look exactly like mine, but because you will recognize yourself somewhere inside it. So let's go. Growing up, I learned to do as I was told. Adults make the decisions, children obey. You know how it goes. I learned to bury what I felt, silence what I wanted, and adjust myself to whatever the adults around me expected. Like many children, I was praised for obedience, but nobody asked what that obedience was costing me internally. I did not learn how to identify my own needs. I did not learn how to disagree safely. I did not learn how to make decisions from a settled sense of who I was. I learned that belonging came through compliance. I learned that keeping the adults happy was safer than expressing myself. And when a child repeatedly suppresses her feelings, those feelings do not disappear. They wait, they build. Sometimes they eventually erupt. So, when I married at 23, without my parents' consent, it looked like I had finally broken free. That's what I thought. And in one sense, I had made a decision for my own life for the first time. But emotionally, I had not yet healed. I had spent years suppressing my voice, and then suddenly I fought. That is what many people misunderstand about trauma responses. A person can move from pleasing everyone to resisting everyone, from never speaking up to reacting strongly, from being controlled to refusing all guidance, from silence to rebellion. But neither extreme necessarily means the person is free or healed. One response says, I must obey so I will not lose love. The other says, I must fight So nobody can control me again. Both can come from fear. One looks passive, the other looks powerful. But underneath both may be the same frightened child trying to feel safe. That was the part I did not understand. I thought leaving home meant I had left my childhood behind. I had not. For many years, I remained a child in a grown woman's body. I was married. I became a mother. I carried adult responsibilities. But some of my emotional responses were still being shaped by wounds I could not name. I feared displeasing people. I struggled to separate what I truly wanted from what others expected of me. At times, my reactions were bigger than the situation in front of me because I was not responding only to that moment. I was also responding to years of accumulated fear, suppression, anger, and unmet emotional needs. And because I did not yet understand my pain, I sometimes bled that pain onto the people closest to me. My husband, my children, the people I loved most. That is one of the hardest truths about unhealed childhood wounds. We can deeply love people and still hurt them from places inside us that never healed. Good intentions do not automatically break generational patterns. Love alone does not remove what we have been conditioned to repeat. Yes, awareness matters a lot, but even awareness is not always enough. Healing requires us to identify the pattern, understand where it came from, and practice a different response. When I finally began connecting these dots, I learned and entered a season of deep grief. I grieved the childhood I did not have. I grieved the voice I had buried. I grieved the healthier version of myself that might have existed if I had been emotionally safe enough to develop freely. I also grieved the ways my unhealed pain had affected the people I loved. Healing is not always immediately joyful. Sometimes healing begins with mourning. You begin to see what happened to you. You see what was missing. You see what you carried into adulthood. And you realize how much of your life was shaped by things you did not choose. That realization can be painful, but it can also become the doorway to freedom. Because once you can see the pattern, you no longer have to remain controlled by it. This is where I discovered a powerful truth. God did not create us without the capacity to change. And this is what science recognizes and calls neuroplasticity. You may have heard that word before. It describes the brain's ability to form new pathways and adapt through repeated experiences and practices. In simple terms, The patterns you learned are not necessarily the patterns you must keep for the rest of your life. You may have learned them to shut down when conflict begins. You may have learned to become aggressive when you feel unheard. You may have learned in your childhood to abandon yourself to keep other people happy. You may have learned to confuse control with love, anxiety with attraction, silence with patience, or endurance with faithfulness. Those responses may have helped you survive an earlier environment, that is your childhood, but they do not have to continue governing your adult life. Healing is possible, not because the past did not matter, not because you can simply pray your memories away, and not because becoming aware suddenly changes everything. It does not. Healing becomes possible when you begin doing the consistent work of recognizing these old patterns, regulating your responses, challenging inherited beliefs, grieving what was lost, and practicing new ways of living. Perhaps you are listening to me and wondering whether your childhood is still showing up in your adult life. Ask yourself, do my reactions sometimes feel bigger than what just happened? Do I panic when someone is disappointed in me? Do I struggle to say no without feeling guilty? Do I become defensive whenever I feel corrected? Do I shut down during conflict? Do I keep choosing relationships in which I must prove my worth? Do I overfunction for everyone and secretly resent them for needing me? Do I find myself parenting from anger, fear, or control, even though I promise myself I will be different? These patterns do not automatically mean you are difficult, rebellious, weak, or broken. They may just be echoes of your childhood experiences that you did not yet have a language for. Your adult behavior may be telling the story your younger self was never allowed to tell. And this is why I created Trauma Redeemed Mentorship, TRM. TRM is not simply a place where we identified what happened in your childhood, because awareness without freedom is not enough. You can know why you people please and still keep abandoning yourself. You can understand why you shut down and still remain unable to speak during conflict. You can recognize that you inherited unhealthy patterns and still repeat them with your spouse and children. TRM helps people move from simply knowing to intentionally living differently. It is a Christ-centered, structured healing journey where we examine how childhood experiences shaped our beliefs, emotional responses, relationships, parenting, boundaries, and understanding of ourselves. We do not remain trapped in blame. We take responsibility for what we do with what happened to us. We learn practical tools. We reflect. We practice. We make new choices repeatedly until these choices begin to become a new way of living. That is what redemption looks like. Not pretending the wound never happened, not silencing your pain with religious language, not blaming your parents for the rest of your life. Redemption means the wound no longer gets the final word. You cannot change the childhood you experienced, for sure. You cannot return and give your younger version everything she needed. But you can decide how that childhood will show up in you today. You can interrupt the pattern before it reaches your marriage. And if it has already reached your marriage, you can also repair it. You can stop handing it to your children and make a difference in how you parent them. You can learn to respond from the adult you are becoming instead of constantly reacting from the child who was wounded. You are not broken, and you're not beyond healing. And you're not alone. Your story is not finished. The frightened child may still be present, but she no longer has to control your choices. You can become the safe, emotionally healthy adult she needed. And you can build a life that is no longer governed by fear, guilt, suppression, or survival. If this message helped you to recognize a pattern in your own life, subscribe to Trauma Redeemed Mentorship channel. Share in the comments one childhood pattern you now recognize in your adult life that is controlling your adult life. And if you're ready to move beyond recognition, because as I've said, recognition awareness does not bring healing. So if you're ready to move beyond just awareness and begin the structured work of healing, you are invited to learn more about Trauma Redeemed Mentorship. You cannot rewrite the beginning of your story, but with God, truth, responsibility, and intentional practice, you can change what happens next. Live redeemed.